Well, hello there, listening squirrels. It's time for Chapter 9, The Affair of the Forged Notes. Inspector Marriott hitched his chair an inch or two further forward. He was seated in the private office of Blunt's brilliant detectives, and by his glance towards the door, which led into the outer office, it would seem that his business was very private indeed. Except for those peepholes. "I've come to make you a proposition, Mr. Beresford," he threw out. "What would you say to rounding up a really big gang?" "Is there such a thing?" asked Tommy. "What do you mean, is there such a thing? I've always thought that gangs were confined to fiction, like master crooks and super criminals." "The master crook isn't very common," agreed the inspector, "but Lord bless you, sir, there's any amount of gangs knocking about." "I don't know that I should be at my best dealing with a gang," said Tommy. "The amateur crime, the crime of a quiet family life, that is where I flatter myself that I shine. Drama of strong domestic interest, that's the thing, with Tuppence at hand to supply all those little feminine details, which are so important and so apt to be ignored by the denser male." His eloquence was arrested abruptly as Tuppence threw a cushion at him and requested him not to talk nonsense. We'll have your little bit of fun, won't you, sir?" said Inspector Marriott, smiling paternally at them both. "If you'll not take offense at my saying so, it's a pleasure to see two young people enjoying life as much as you two do." "Do we enjoy life?" said Tuppence, opening her eyes very wide. "I suppose we do. I've never thought about it before." "To return to that gang you were talking about," said Tommy, "in spite of my extensive private practice, duchesses, millionaires, and all the best women, didn't say chair, women, I might perhaps condescend to look into the matter for you. I don't like to see Scotland Yard at fault. You'll have the Daily Mail after you before you know where you are. As I said before, you must have your little bit of fun. Well, it's like this." Again he hitched his chair forward. "There's any amount of forged notes going about just now, hundreds of them. The amount of counterfeit treasury notes in circulation would surprise you. Most artistic bit of work it is. Here's one of them." He took a pound note from his pocket and handed it to Tommy. "Looks all right, doesn't it?" Tommy examined the note with great interest. "By Jove, I'd never spot there was anything wrong with it." "No more would most people. Now here's a genuine one. I'll show you the differences. Very slight they are, but you'll soon learn to tell them apart. Take this magnifying glass." At the end of 5 minutes' coaching, both Tommy and Tuppence had learned to spot the duds with unfailing accuracy. "What do you want us to do, Inspector Marriott?" asked Tuppence. "Just keep our eyes open for these things?" "A great deal more than that, Mrs. Beresford. I'm pinning my faith on you to get to the bottom of the matter. You see, we've discovered that the notes are being circulated from the West End. Somebody pretty high up in the social scale is doing the distributing. They're passing them to the other side of the channel as well. Now there's a certain person who is interesting us very much, a Major Laidlaw. Perhaps you've heard the name?" "I think I have," said Tommy. "Connected with racing, isn't that it?" "Yes, maybe it's Laidlaw. Is pretty well known in connection with the turf. There's nothing actually against him, but there's a general impression that he's been a bit too smart over one or two rather shady transactions. Men in the know look queer when he's mentioned. Nobody knows much of his past or where he came from. He's got a very attractive French wife who's seen about everywhere with a train of admirers. They must spend a lot of money, the Laidlaws, and I'd like to know where it comes from. Possibly from the train of admirers, suggested Tommy. That's the general idea, but I'm not so sure. It may be coincidence, but a lot of notes have been forthcoming from a certain very smart little gambling club which is much frequented by the Laidlaws and their set. This racing gambling set get rid of a lot of loose money in notes. There couldn't be a better way of getting it into circulation. And where do we come in? This way. Young St. Vincent and his wife are friends of yours, I understand. They're in pretty thick with the Laidlaw set, though not as thick as they were. Through them it will be easy for you to get a footing in the same set in a way that none of our people could attempt. There's no likelihood of their spotting you as Tex. You'll have an ideal opportunity. Why have we got to find out exactly where they get the stuff from, if they're passing it? Quite so, said Tommy. Major Laidlaw goes out with an empty suitcase. When he returns, it's crammed to the bursting point with treasury notes. Next time he does it, I sleuth him. Is that the idea? More or less, but don't neglect the lady and her father, M. Harrelade. Remember, the notes are being passed on both sides of the channel. My dear Marriott, exclaimed Tommy reproachfully, Blunt's brilliant detectives do not know the meaning of the word neglect. The inspector rose. Well, good luck to you, he said, and departed. Tommy seemed to go into a brown study for a minute or two. Then he roused himself and murmuring, I think so. Yes, I think so. He opened one of the drawers of the desk and took out what looked like 2 slices of India rubber. What are those nasty things? Inquired Tuppence, looking at them with considerable distaste. They go in the cheeks, explained Tommy, slipping them into his mouth and adjoining them in position with much facial contortion. He affixed a bushy red eyebrow and scowled sideways at Tuppence. Clique of the 40 faces, he explained. Clique? C-L-E-E-K. Do you expect to make a hit with Mrs. Laidlaw with that fat-faced effect? Fat-faced, inquired Tuppence coldly. Since I'm unknown to the lady, it will be unnecessary, said Tommy, removing the slices of India rubber. Besides, I fancy it would interfere with the browsing and tile slushing. But they do alter the appearance, don't they? Well, that's all right. If there's a gang in it, I must be clique. Marriott Superintendent Narcombe, even Albert is provided with a part. And I'm Margot, the Queen of the Apaches, I suppose, said Tuppence with some satisfaction. Not at all. The semi-French Mrs. Laidlaw is cast for that part. You're Elisa Whatnot. No, Elsa Whatnot. The good, pure girl for whose sake Cleek has renounced a life of crime. I guess Elsa. Yes, but that's darn dull for me, protested Tuppence. She never does anything as far as I can remember. She's very good and pure, said Tommy encouragingly, and the guiding star of my existence. Tuppence did not register any marked enthusiasm. Fortunately, she observed, we never keep the thing up. I hope we'll make a success of this. Anyway, there will be nightclubs and cocktails in it. Tuppence, said Tommy, you're a real rake at heart. What a good thing it is that you're married to a sober, steady, middle-aged man like myself. Making the acquaintance of the Laidlaws proved an easy affair. Tommy and Tuppence, young, well-dressed, eager for life, and with apparently money to burn, were soon made free of that particular... Let's see what this is. I've seen this word before, but I'm not sure how to pronounce it. Oh, why don't they ever give me the... It means like a clique. Coterie, coterie. A small group of people with shared interest or taste, especially one that is exclusive of other people. Coterie, I guess. Of that particular coterie in which the Laidlaws had their being, Major Laidlaw was a tall, fair man, typically English in appearance, with a hearty, sportsmanlike manner, slightly belied by the hard lines around his eyes and the occasional quick sideways glance that assorted oddly with his supposed character. He was a very dexterous card player, and Tommy noticed that when the stakes were high, he seldom rose from the table a loser. Marguerite Laidlaw was quite a different proposition. She was a charming creature with the slenderness of a wood nymph and the face of some artist, Greuze, Greuze picture. Her dainty, broken English was fascinated, and Tommy felt that it was no wonder most men were her slaves. She seemed to take a great fancy to Tommy from the first, and playing his part, he allowed himself to be swept into her train. "My Tommy," she would say, "but positively I cannot go without my Tommy. His hair, it is the color of the sunset, is it not?" Her father was a more sinister figure, very correct, very upright, with his little black yeard, Y-E-A-R-D, that's capitalized, and his watchful eyes. Tuppence was the first to report progress. She came to Tommy with 10 one-pound notes. "Have a look at these fissures. They're wrong uns, aren't they?" Tommy examined them and confirmed Tuppence's diagnosis. "Where'd you get these from?" "That boy, Jimmy Falconer. Marguerite Laidlaw gave them to him to put on a horse for her. I said I wanted small notes and gave him a tenner in exchange. All new and crisp," said Tommy thoughtfully. "They can't have passed through many hands. I suppose young Falconer is all right?" "Jimmy? Oh, he's a dear. He and I are becoming great friends." "So I noticed," said Tommy coldly. "Do you really think it necessary?" "Oh, it isn't business," said Tuppence cheerily. "It's pleasure. He's such a nice boy. I'm glad to get him out of that woman's clutches. You've no idea of the amount of money she's cost him." "It looks to me as though he were getting rather a pash for you, Tuppence." Pash. "I've noticed the same myself sometimes. It's nice to know one's still young and attractive, isn't it? Your moral tone, Tuppence, is deplorably low. You look at these things from the wrong point of view." "I haven't enjoyed myself so much for years," declared Tuppence shamelessly, "in any way. What about you? Do I ever see you nowadays? Aren't you always living in Marguerite Laidlaw's pocket?" "Business," said Tommy crisply. "But she is attractive, isn't she?" "Not my type," said Tommy. "I don't admire her." "Liar," laughed Tuppence. But I always did think I'd rather marry a liar than a fool." "I suppose," said Tommy, "that there's no absolute necessity for a husband to be either. But Tuppence merely threw him a pitying glance and withdrew. Amongst Mrs. Laidlaw's train of admirers was a simple but extremely wealthy gentleman, the name of Hank Ryder, R-Y-D-E-R. Mr. Ryder came from Alabama, and from the first he was disposed to make a friend and confidant of Tommy. "That's a wonderful woman, sir," said Mr. Ryder, following the lovely Marguerite with reverential eyes. "Plumb full of civilization. Can't beat La Gay France, can you? When I'm near her, I feel as though I was one of the Almighty's earliest experiments. I guess he'd got to get his hands in before he attempted anything so lovely as that perfectly lovely woman." Tommy agreeing politely with these sentiments, Mr. Ryder unburdened himself still further. "Seems kind of a shame a lovely creature like that should have money worries." "Has she?" asked Tommy. You betcha life she has. Queer fish, Laidlaw. She's scared of him. Told me so. Daren't tell him about her little bills." "Are they little bills?" said Tommy. "Well, when I say little, after all, a woman's got to wear clothes, and the less there are of them, the more they cost. The way I figure it out, and a pretty woman like that doesn't want to go about in last season's goods. Cards, too. The poor little thing's been mighty unlucky at cards. Why, she lost 50 to me last night." "She won 200 from Jimmy Faulkner the night before," said Tommy dryly. "Did she indeed? That relieves my mind some. By the way, there seem to be a lot of dud notes floating around in your country just now. I paid in a bunch at my bank this morning, and 25 of them were down and outers. So the polite gentleman behind the counter informed me. That's rather a large proportion. Were they new looking? New and crisp as they make 'em?" "Why, they were the ones Mrs. Laidlaw paid over to me, I reckon. Wonder where she got 'em from. One of these toughs on the race course, as likely as not." "Yes," said Tommy, "very likely. You know, Mr. Beersford, I'm new to this sort of high life, all these swell dames and the rest of the outfit. Only made my pile a short while back. Came right over to Europe, YURRUP, to see life." Tommy nodded. He made a mental note to the effect that with the aid of Marguerite Laidlaw, Mr. Ryder would probably see a good deal of life, and that the price charged would be heavy. Meanwhile, for the second time, he had evidence that the forged notes were being distributed pretty near at hand, and that in all probability Marguerite Laidlaw had a hand in their distribution. On the following night he himself was given a proof. It was at that small select meeting place mentioned by Inspector Marriott. There was dancing there, but the real attraction of the place lay behind a pair of imposing folding doors. There were 2 rooms there with green baize, B-A-I-Z-E, covered tables, where vast sums changed hands nightly. Marguerite Laidlaw, rising at last to go, thrust a quantity of small notes into Tommy's hand. "They're so bulky, Tommy. You will change them? Yes, a big note. See my so sweet little bag. It bulges them to distraction." Tommy brought her the 100-pound note she asked for. Then, in a quiet manner, he examined the note she had given him. At least a quarter of them were counterfeit. But where did she get her supplies from? To that he had as yet no answer. By means of Albert's cooperation, he was almost sure that Laidlaw was not the man. His movements had been watched closely and had yielded no results. Tommy suspected her father, the Saturn M. Hurlade. He went to and from France fairly often. What could be simpler than to bring the notes across from him? A false bottom to a trunk, something of that kind. Tommy strolled slowly out of the club, absorbed in these thoughts, but was suddenly recalled to immediate necessities. Outside in the street was Mr. Hank P. Ryder, and it was clear at once that Mr. Ryder was not strictly sober. At the moment he was trying to hang his hat on the radiator of a car and missed it by some inches every time. This gall-darned hatch stand, said Mr. Ryder tearfully. Not like that in the States. A man can hang up his hat every night, sir. You're wearing two hats. Two hats. Never seen a man wearing two hats before. Must be affect climate. Perhaps I've got two heads, said Tommy gravely. So you have, said Mr. Ryder. That's odd. That's remarkable fact. Let's have a cocktail. Prohibition. That's what's done me in. I guess I'm drunk. Constitutionally drunk. Cocktailish. Mixed 'em. Angel's kiss, Marguerite. Lovely creature, fond of me, too. Horse's neck. 2 martinis, 3 road to ruinish, no roadish room. Mixed 'em all in beer tankard. Bet me I wouldn't. I shed to hell, I shed. Tommy interrupted. That's all right, he said soothingly. Now what about getting home? No home to go to, said Mr. Ryder sadly, and wept. What hotel are you staying at? Asked Tommy. Can't go home, said Mr. Ryder. Treasure hunt. Swell thing to do. She did it. 7 dial Shevin. We are Shevin cocktailish. 3 roads a ruin. Never mind that, said Tommy. Where are you? But Mr. Ryder became suddenly dignified. He drew himself erect and attained a sudden miraculous command over his speech. Young man, I'm telling you, Marguerite took me in her car treasure hunting, English aristocracy, I'll do it, under the cobblestones, 500 pounds. Solemn thought, 'tis solemn thought. I'm telling you, young man, you've been kind to me. I've got your welfare at heart. At heart, sir, at heart. We Americans. Tommy interrupted him this time with even less ceremony. What's that you say? Mrs. Laidlaw took you in a car? The American nodded with a kind of owlish solemnity. To 7 dials? Again, that owlish nod. And you found 500 pounds there? Mr. Ryder struggled for words. She did, he corrected his questioner. Left me outside the door. I always left outside. It's kinder said. Kinder sad. It's kinder sad. Outside, always outside. Would you know your way there? I guess so. Hank Ryder doesn't lose his bearings. Tommy hauled him along unceremoniously. He found his own car where it was waiting, and persistently they were bowling eastward. Against Tommy's shoulder in a wait a minute. The cool air revived Mr. Ryder after slumping against Tommy's shoulder in a kind of stupor. He awoke clear-headed and refreshed. Say, boy, where are we? He demanded. 7 Dials, said Tommy crisply. Is this where you came with Mrs. Laidlaw tonight? It looks kinder familiar, admitted Mr. Ryder, looking round. Seems to me we turned off to the left somewhere down here. That's it. That street there. Tommy turned off obediently. Mr. Ryder issued directions. That's it, sure, and round to the right. Say, aren't the smells awful? Yes, past that pub at the corner, sharp round, and stop at the mouth of the little alley. But what's the big deal? Hand it to me. Some of the oof left behind. Are we going to put one over on them? That's exactly it, said Tommy. We're going to put one over on them. Rather a joke, isn't it? I'll tell the world, assented Mr. Ryder, though I'm just a mite hazy about it all, he ended wistfully. Tommy got out and assisted Mr. Ryder to alight also. They advanced into the alleyway. On the left were the backs of a row of dilapidated houses, most of which had doors opening into the alley. Mr. Ryder came to a shop before one of these doors. In here she went, he declared. It was this door, I'm plumb certain of it. They all look very alike, said Tommy. Reminds me of the story of the soldier and the princess. You remember? They made a cross on the door to show which one it was. Shall we do the same? Laughing, he drew a piece of white chalk from his pocket and made a rough cross low down on the door. Then he looked up at the various dim shapes that prowled high on the walls of the alley, one of which was uttering a blood-curdling yowl. Lots of cats about, he remarked cheerfully. What is the procedure? Asked Mr. Ryder. Do we step inside? Adopting due precautions, we do, said Tommy. He glanced up and down the alleyway, then softly tried the door. It yielded. He pushed it open and peered into a dim yard. Noiselessly, he passed through, Mr. Ryder on his heels. Gee, said the latter, there's something coming down the alley. He slipped outside again. Tommy stood still for a minute, then hearing nothing, went on. He took a torch from his pocket and switched on the light for a brief second. That momentary flash enabled him to see his way ahead. He pushed forward and tried the closed door. Ahead of him. That too gave, and very softly he pushed it open and went in. Oh, Lord, how much more? Pushed it open and went in. After standing still a second and listening, he again switched on the torch, and at that flash, as though at a given signal, the place seemed to rise round him. 2 men were behind him. They closed in on him and bore him down. Lights! Growled a voice. An incandescent gas burner was lit. By its light, Tommy saw a circle of unpleasing faces. His eyes wandered gently round the room and noted some of the objects in it. Ah, he said pleasantly. Excuse me. Pleasantly. The headquarters of the counterfeiting industry, if I'm not mistaken. Shut your jaw, growled one of the men. The door opened and shut behind Tommy, and a genial and well-known voice spoke. Got him, boys? That's right. Now, Mr. Tech, let me tell you, you're up against it. Ah, said Tommy, Mr. Hank Ryder, this is a surprise. I guess you mean that too. I've been laughing fit to bust all this evening, leading you here like a child, and you so pleased with your cleverness. Why, Sonny, I was on to you from the start. You weren't in with that crowd for your health. I let you play about for a while, and when you got real suspicious of the lovely Marguerite, I said to myself, now's the time to lead him to it. I guess your friends won't be hearing of you for some time. Going to knock me on the head? Inquired Tommy. You've got a nerve, all right. No, we shall attempt no violence, just keep you under restraint, so to speak. I'm afraid you're backing the wrong horse, said Tommy. I've got no intention of keeping under restraint, as you call it. Mr. Ryder smiled genuinely. From outside, a cat uttered a melancholy, no, it's genially, I guess, a melancholy cry to the moon. Banking on that cross you put on the door, eh, Sonny? Said Mr. Ryder. I shouldn't if I were you. No. Turn it. I shouldn't if I were you, because I know that story you mentioned. I stepped back into the alleyway to enact the part of the dog with eyes as big as cartwheels. If you were in that alley now, you would observe that every door in the alley is marked with an identical cross. Tommy dropped his head despondently. Thought you were mighty clever, didn't you? Said Ryder as the words left his lips. A mighty bang sounded at the door. What's that? He cried, starting. At the same time, an assault began on the front room of the house. The door at the back fell in, and Inspector Marriott showed in the doorway. Well done, Marriott, said Tommy. You were quite right as to the district. I'd like you to make the acquaintance of Mr. Hank Ryder, who knows all the best fairy tales. You see, Mr. Ryder, he added gently, I've had my suspicions of you. Albert, that important-looking boy with the big ears is Albert, had orders to follow on his motorcycle if you and I went off joyriding at any time, and whilst I was ostentatiously marking a chalk cross on the door to engage your attention, I also emptied a little bottle of valerian on the ground. Nasty smell, but cats love it. All the cats in the neighborhood were assembled outside to mark the right house. When Albert and the police arrived, he looked at the dumbfounded Mr. Ryder with a smile, then rose to his feet. Good night, Marriott. Glad I've been able to put the job through. I've seen 4 men so far besides Mr. Ryder here. Do 5 men constitute a gang? I suppose so. I'm glad there really is such a thing, and that I've come across it. Someday, perhaps I shall meet a master cook. Sorry about my flub ups. Chapter 10 is called Blind Man's Bluff. Keep intending to read earlier in the day and just don't have. I'm not so seeing double. Look how beautiful this is. And using my new hook nook hook. Little yarn barf roll. Strawberry shortcake woolies. That's all I get done is play with new yarn. Love y'all. Be sweet, don't be ugly. See you tomorrow. Tea at 3. Good night. Did I say be sweet, don't be ugly? I think I did. Bye.